Question 1. How does your product use or challenge conventions, and how does it represent social groups or issues? The film I created uses and challenges many conventions of filmmaking. The first notable convention in the film is the pacing. The film is driven mostly with multiple short takes that keep the audience from fully being able to grasp what's happening and help the film move along. Based on my research, horror films tend to have very long, drawn out takes with over exaggerated acting as they avoid a threat. A perfect example is the opening to Nightmare on Elm Street, with Nancy wandering an open corridor for a minute and a half. This convention really doesn't convey much to the audience as far as plot, more in establishing a specific scenario, sort of like a cold opening. I took note from the opening of Child's Play that establishes the entire premise of the possessed doll in the opening that resembles more like a opening to an action film. However, when applying this to my film, I decided to scale it down to a small on-set location to help limit the audience's perspective on the situation, similar to the opening of Friday the 13th and Halloween. Another more notable camera work technique was to establish who was dominant in the scene. Most of the shots of Scout, the antagonist, were shot in low angles to assert his dominance, while the shots of Adam were in high angles to show he is the lesser victim. The way I decided to convey the plot in the opening was through the dialogue. Unlike the opening to The Texas Chainsaw Massacre that translated the plot of the story in the opening through long text paragraphs that resemble a Star Wars opening, I decided to clue in the audience through the dialogue that would eventually match up with the visuals. This is what the opening to Halloween did with the perspective switch at the end, but they chose to have no dialogue to explain the plot. I did the exact opposite of this concept, choosing to focus on the dialogue. Most time the dialogue is serious and dark, but I worked in a bit of stale humor to resemble the humor used in Nightmare on Elm Street. This was also another tactic implemented to keep the audience engaged. I also used the set and props to help build the story. For example, the radio broadcaster references a Colt 1911 as the weapon used, and when there's a close-up of the clock, the same gun and ammunition can be seen laying on the desk, which could have been used to clue in the audience on the plot implicitly. This tactic was taken from Friday the 13th, and how part of their opening included a storage boathouse that had a ski mask and machete that would ultimately be what the antagonists use at the end of the film. Also, the bulletin board in the background is filled with health reports on how the butchery closed down from strong odors coming from the strange meat. Most times the antagonist appears on screen and it is made obvious that he's the villain, but I wanted to see if I could possibly have the antagonist present during the entire film and make the audience ponder on whether he's bad or not, but ultimately reveal that he's the villain. I accomplished this by having the antagonist be hidden throughout the film, wearing medical scrubs and avoiding the actor's face while filming, but also having him do the opposite of things that he's being accused of, such as removing a bullet out of the shoulder that he just shot. I followed the styles of the horror films I researched by keeping the image dark to build a dark atmosphere. This was accomplished in two ways, both during the filming and during the editing process. Firstly, the majority of the shots are close up to further help build suspense due to the audience perspective being reduced. Secondly, in the editing software Premiere, an adjustment layer was added to be able to bring down the contrast, darkening the image, and also an unsharp mask was added to give the film the style of having film grain, as the horror film openings I researched all were filmed on cameras that used film. An additional thing that was added to the image was the letterbox bars. They were placed manually instead of changing the resolution, as I had a problem with the footage and it didn't allow me to add them in that manner. This helped give a professional look as all the openings I researched. One thing that really helped bring the second half of the film together was the incidental music that ended in an almost loud jump scare climax. This is a way to cue the audience to feel suspense. All the films I researched used this technique. The music I chose to incorporate was orchestral, as this was the conventional music I noticed in all the openings. Also, the music was cued in during a dramatic reveal that happened. Mine being when the body of Adam was unveiled under the tarp. In Nightmare on Elm Street, this was when Freddy's silhouette was seen in the background. Also, the voiceover dialogue is source music coming from the radio that's explicitly seen on screen. Titles in the film were implemented the same fashion that I researched them. The font is very simple and nothing super flashy. However, the one thing that is different is the color. In the horror films I researched, they were either white or a yellowish color. I changed it to a gradient of red because otherwise they would be too prominent on screen. They appeared when they were saying what matched up with the visuals, such as SFX and bullet wounds. The location of the titles were placed along the bottom of the screen in one of the open left or right thirds. The duration in the horror films I researched was about 5 seconds, so that's exactly what I did in my opening. It may seem like I crammed them all at the beginning of the opening, but I did this intentionally, as the horror films I researched, they seem to have an overload of credits at the beginning, and towards the end they were few. So I made an emphasis of this by having them abruptly end about halfway through. Lastly, all the horror films I researched, the title was on a black screen at the very end of the opening. The font is extra large, and so that's what I did. When it comes to the social groups and social issue, the only issue that came to mind was the issue of cannibalism, since the film revolves around a cannibalistic butcher. This is portrayed as wrong, as he is carrying out his operations away from the public eye. But the original idea during the conception of this opening was to shed light on the literal interpretation of the question, where does our food truly come from, taking it to an extreme.